Hey friends, I want to welcome our new sponsor, Laird Superfood. As a type 1 diabetic myself, I'm always interested in stories and products around nutrition, and I really like the idea of functional nutrition in a small scoop. Laird Superfood all started when big wave surfer Laird Hamilton shared his functional coffee with his friend Paul Hodge. Paul tried his special blend, and he knew that Laird's incredible coffee recipe needed to be made available to everyone, and they launched the original superfood creamer in 2015. What happened was Laird started experimenting with his morning ritual about 2 decades ago, and he found that when he started adding fats to his morning cup, like coconut oil, that he had energy throughout the rest of his day. He eventually perfected his recipe for an epic cup of fuel and started sharing it with friends in the surf community. Now, all Laird products are sustainably sourced and thoroughly tested to ensure that you're incorporating the cleanest, finest fuel into your routines. And again, as a diabetic, I appreciate no sugar from highly refined corn syrup. There's no artificial flavors, colors, or additives. Are you ready to feel more energized, focused, and supported? Go to lairdsuperfood.com, that's L-A-I-R-D, superfood.com, and you can add nourishing, plant-based foods to fuel you from sunrise to sunset. Use our promo code HANSELMINUTES at checkout to save 15% off your purchase today. Hi, I'm Scott Hanselman. This is another episode of Hansel Minutes. Today I'm chatting with Sarah Milstein. She's a VP of Engineering at Daily, the co-author of the Twitter book. She's worked at places like O'Reilly Media and was the co-founder of Lean Startup Productions. So you've been in engineering for quite a few years now, haven't you?
I would say that I've been in software for quite a few years.
Right. So I gave you a little setup there because you're a VP of Engineering. Right, you're vice president of engineering, you lead engineering teams, you have led engineers for some time. But when I said you've been in engineering, you split that hair. Why is that an important hair to split?
Well, I'm a little bit unusual as a VPE in that I'm not an engineer. And I've been in software for many years and have, I think, a good understanding of how software is built and the social processes and some of the technical structure we need to make it effective and to ship and meet our customer needs. But I don't code. I know like the bold tag in HTML. Well, I did. I don't even know if people still use that actually. So I'm not an engineer, and I lead, I think, in a somewhat different way than engineers do. But again, I've been in software a long time and I think have a lot of relevant experience through that.
That's really interesting, though, because I have seen companies where, like, the VP of engineering moves up through the ranks, and it's almost as if they are the, quote unquote, most technical engineer, and there's a battle royale of engineers, and then the smartest one or the most obnoxious one or the whatever personality type that company's culture values ends up becoming the top one. And some have said that in order to lead engineers, one must be an engineer because you get a certain amount of free charisma, +2 charisma points because, we respect Sarah. She's been engineering for years. Is that a fallacy?
Yeah, this is, I think, the most interesting thing. I hear this all the time. Like, how do you get respect from engineers if you're not technical? As if, I am technical at some level, but being an engineer is the only way that people would find to respect a leader. I think, interestingly, one of the ways that I get a lot of respect and am able to work well with engineers is because I'm not micromanaging anybody, and we have to partner with each other. I have to learn from them. They have to learn from me. We bring different things to the conversations to be able to problem solve together. And there's not a battle royale, as you said. There's nothing to battle about. There's not egos. There's not a bunch of different opinions about the best technical direction. I sometimes need to make technical decisions or help guide them, and I need to get different opinions and ideas or contribute to them. But it's actually much more often the case that we need to make decisions together. And having different perspectives and a good process for doing that and being able to respect each other's different perspectives is much more important than my having particularly deep technical expertise.
Interesting. So how would one make a large technical decision, like, whether it be something medium, like picking a JavaScript library or picking a CSS library, or something big, like this is going to be a monolith or this is going to be microservices? Do you have a council? Do you all vote and you get two votes at the end and you ultimately decide?
Right. It depends on the company, of course. I mean, one thing I will say about daily is part of the reason that the role works well for me to take it and run with it as a non-engineer is that this is going to sound a little funny. It's possible I'm the least technical person at the company. It's a deep engineering team. The founders are technical. The marketers are technical. The product people are technical. Like, I think almost everybody else is an engineer. I'm struggling to think of anybody who's not, and it's about 60 people right now. So in that regard, when we need to make big decisions, first of all, a number of them were made. The basic architecture was decided before I got
you're
here. But when we need
inheriting
to make,
an architecture.
But when we need to make new decisions, usually we're in a position where I am helping to identify the people who can bring together good information to contribute to the decision. And we have some collaborative discussions and decide together. Occasionally, there'll be a person or a team that particularly owns something, and we'll need to consult with other teams. I like to make sure the consultation is happening. But it's rare that we are hitting on things where I have certainly worked at places where there are big fights about what front end should we be going with or something. But it's not, that's really the case for us, I think, in part because nobody's expecting me to just make a decision. Everybody kind of has to step up and contribute ideas. And if it's a bigger decision, we will form like an ad hoc committee to run for some period of time to sort things out. If it's smaller decisions, it's a couple of meetings. And I don't like to over rely on people who have been around a long time, but we have a number of people who have a lot of perspective, and we can bring them in to help add to our knowledge about what has generated benefits and trade-offs in the past. So that can help us make decisions too.
This reference I'm about to make may be a bit of a deep cut, and it may be culturally specific and age specific. So for our listeners who may be a different age or from overseas, bear with me for a second here. There was a Saturday Night Live skit in the 80s where Phil Hartman played an unfrozen caveman lawyer. He was frozen. He fell into some water. He got into an ice cube. They unfroze him. He went to law school. And when he makes his arguments in front of the court, he goes, "I'm just a caveman." He does that to make everyone feel like, oh, well, this ignorant caveman doesn't know anything. I don't know your strange ways. And then he smacks them with some obscure legal precedent and blows their mind because you've underestimated him. I'm just a caveman. I have used that technique in meetings to like put people at ease. Like, I'm new here. I don't know what's going on. But, my first impression from watching you all discuss this is X. Are you using the unfrozen caveman lawyer rhetorical technique where you actually have this technical background that you're keeping in reserve and then bringing out when appropriate? Do you remember that skit, or is that just a deep
I do. It's so funny. No, I do remember it, and it's well described. I think it's, in some ways, it's kind of funny. I almost feel like I sometimes surprise myself by being like, "Oh, I know what we're talking about here," actually. But I think it's much more often. I'm trying to think of a good example because there are almost no decisions that are unique in the decision. You're always kind of dealing with benefits and trade-offs, and how much of those are near-term and long-term, and how far into the future is our strategy based on our kind of business model and our like market traction. So I'm trying to think of a good example where I'm often bringing in those kinds of questions and sometimes asking people to think about the context in which we're making a decision or discussing something, and that's valuable. And I'm not down in the weeds because I'm able to sort of stay at that level and help reset conversations as we need to. Or also, just to be clear, sometimes I'm like, you all talk about this, come back and tell me what the decision is, and like tell me what you considered. What were the trade-offs and benefits that you considered? But it's not that I'm secretly going to suddenly have deep knowledge about like which codecs we should be using or like what our stack should look. I'm not hiding that information. But I think there is also an interesting piece of it where I can ask questions anytime that are like, this is going to be we hate to use the term dumb questions, but like this will be a very basic question. And sometimes that sort of thing does reset a conversation a little bit. It helps bring us back to something that is kind of central or important where we might have been off in the weeds.
Yeah, rather than saying it's a dumb question, I'll sometimes say, this may be an ignorant question or an uninformed question because I'm new to the team, but my impression, and in this case, that ignorance, that uninformedness is a superpower because it's really a fresh perspective. So one person's dumb question is another person's fresh perspective. And I like that framing myself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think that's both personally useful and useful to the group when we're talking about things that I can just bring in any question. Everyone's like, oh, of course she needs to ask that. And then it resets us.
Yeah. And you've talked about this on leaddev.com. You wrote an article where you called out that software development involves a lot more than coding, right? You have an MBA, so you are the bridge, presumably, between the C-suite and the engineers, because the engineers are building cool stuff, but you're shipping features, which is a very different thing. The VP of engineering has to ship features that serve the business. Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, you're totally right about that. I don't feel that hard split typically at Daily, but I think that's partly because we invest a lot of time, and this is one of the things that I focus on, in making sure that the teams understand the strategy and both kind of over for the year and for the quarter, and can make good informed decisions based on that. So it's not often a split of engineers want to go down one hole and the C-suite wants to go towards customers in another direction. We're usually sharing information in both directions at a regular enough cadence that everybody has the same information to keep making decisions in the same direction.
Okay. So there's not a hard split, but there is context, though, that's simply not their job to know. And that context, that 20,000-foot view is, I would think, a VP's job to understand and then provide that
Totally.
bridge.
Yeah, absolutely. And I spend a lot of time on that.
You mentioned that the culture is really healthy. I know that folks that are listening may not be in a healthy engineering culture. Do you think that that's a top-down thing where you set the vibe, or is it a bad apple deep into the engineering team can kind of mess it up for everybody? How do you think culture is congealed within an engineering group?
Yeah, it certainly, I think, comes from both directions or sort of all directions.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that, interestingly, sometimes, of course, you can't have individuals in the whole team who are disruptive, disrespectful, not invested in the strategy or learning it. All of that, like that is problematic. But you also can't expect that individuals will generate the framework in which to land good behavior. So it sort of works both ways. I think good culture comes from a combination of leaders, founders, and newer leaders really paying attention to a certain set of values for your company and reinforcing them, and then expecting that a majority of other people will meet them a majority of the time. Not everybody's perfect all the time. And if you have people who aren't meeting them, you have to, in some regular way, you have to address that. But having some values that more or less everybody could say, we care about this, matters a lot. When I got to Daily, I've been there about a year and a half. The company was like not quite 4 years old when I showed up. And I did a listening tour of everybody in engineering at the time. And I asked, what would you want to stay the same as we get bigger? And what would you like to change? 100% of people, without any prompting, said that they wanted us to maintain our helpful, kind culture where people genuinely help each other do things. And we have a lot of deep, unusual technical areas where people need to teach each other things. And folks wanted an environment where it still felt safe to both ask and for help and spend time helping other people. So that like pre-existed me. And then I can think about structural things that we do to maintain that. And then there are also things like making sure that people who aren't adhering to that there's some accountability for that. That's not our biggest problem, but it's not a non-issue either.
Yeah. The thing that you said the most that resonated with me was that it's not on the individual engineers to generate the framework within which to operate. Like it's that Lord of the Flies idea that we're going to somehow coalesce into a culture just automatically. You'll coalesce into some kind of culture. It will just happen. Like something will organically evolve, but that may not be what we want. So intentionality and deliberate practice in setting up a framework of positivity and the ability to perhaps fail safely without fearing for your job or your next promotion.
Yeah, I think that is absolutely true. So one thing that we do a lot is try to be clear communicators and repeated communicators about important strategic direction or important changes, or even things that are like a team member is leaving and we need to talk about it in a way that's respectful to the team member, but doesn't leave people fearing that they're about to lose their job or they don't know where the person went or what happened to their projects. And I think because we value clear communication, it's partly because we're fully remote and in a lot of asynchronous work, we have to be clear communicators. But because that, we also get a lot of communication from individuals. So we're creating that framework, and then people tend to communicate with the leaders of the company quite a lot. So we have more information. They have more information. We can make better decisions together. And there's a higher level of trust to start with.
Mm-hmm. Hey friends, here's an opportunity that's bigger than just a regular sponsorship. As you may know, I'm coming up on almost 900 episodes of the Hansel Minutes podcast, and I've recorded hundreds and hundreds of those episodes with Zencastr. That's Zencastr. Zencastr allows me to record all of these podcasts and talk to guests from all over the world, and they've recently announced crowdfunding. You can actually invest in Zencastr for as little as $100, and you can join a community of their investors. I have, in fact, invested in Zencastr. I remember when it was just a 1 or 2 person shop. They're now raising money because the podcasting industry has grown so big. Actually, they're saying that the projections are going to be more than $150 billion by 2030. Podcasting is where it's at. So if you are interested in investing in Zencastr, you can go to WeFunder, WeFunder, wefunder.com/Zencastr. That's Zencastr without the E at the end. So Zencastr, wefunder.com/Zencastr, or just click the link in my episode description below, and you can claim your slice of the future of podcasting. Now, I have been here in Portland, Oregon, working remotely for Microsoft for 15 years. So I was working remotely before it was stylish. You did a conference on remote work in 2014. You've been doing distributed teamwork for 20 years, and you've written about it. Did everyone call you when the pandemic happened and like, quick, Sarah, we need tips on remote work? And then you have to juxtapose the difference between being in quarantine versus being in a joyful remote situation?
Totally. That was such a big discussion at the beginning of the pandemic, the difference between like remote work in a pandemic. It's funny. I did get a lot of calls, but in part because I just happened to have written a couple of articles about remote works and things that I was interested in sharing right, I think in like February of 2020. Which is 2020 was the beginning of the pandemic.
March 2020.
I'm losing track. Yes.
I don't know. It's March. It's still March 2020 at this point.
I know, right? So yeah, I mean, I've been having a higher number of conversations than I would have normally, but it was a topic that's been interesting me for years because I've, for a long time, have preferred and been more effective in remote companies.
Why is that? Is that something about your personality that makes you more effective in a remote situation?
I know, interesting question. So one of the things that prompted me to write about this in about 3 years ago is that I heard myself say to somebody like off the cuff, I prefer remote work because it tends to be higher trust. And that I was surprised. You just made a surprised face. And I will say that I was surprised to hear myself say it because it's so counterintuitive. It's not the normal construct that we have for remote work is lower trust. And so that prompted me to do some research into why I might have felt that way. And it turns out that there are both conditions in remote work that can prompt a higher trust kind of a feeling, but there are also people who tend to trust others by default without and people kind of can disprove that trust. And there are people whose dispositions are they don't trust people, especially, and you have to build up the trust. So it turns out that in remote work, it works really well if you are the kind of person who tends to trust, and people can draw down on that, but you tend to trust people, and those sorts of people tend to be drawn toward remote work. So you wind up in like more trusting environments, and the environments themselves have a bunch of things that reinforce that. And it makes for, in some cases, for some people, just like a more satisfying environment. I get that that's not for everybody, but I will say the mechanics can do a lot to overcome or like bridge gaps sometimes too. The various tools that we've all learned to use in the last couple of years.
Interesting. I have been told that my trusting attitude is one of naivete, and that I'm naive to trust people so well. But I've always felt that it's like I have lead a remote team, and I have people who will call me and they'll ask some real question, and I'm not a very good manager. I tend to say stuff like, "You're grown. I mean, I trust you. Like, figure it out, right? Like, you're a grown ass person. I hired you to be like, if you're gonna, hey, I'm gonna be working remotely in Philly for a week. Okay, cool. As long as you have good internet. Well, but when is the deadline? Like, if you do it at 3 a.m. or 8, if you're a morning person, night person, we have some core hours. Be available if I can get you. I hope the work gets done. More power to you, right? Like, that could be abused, right? It could be like, hey, where's Sarah? I haven't heard from Sarah in weeks, right? Well,
Yeah.
it depends, right? How am I supposed to hear from you? Am I supposed to see your code? Am I supposed to see your work product, right? How do you deal with that?
I mean, I find this to be like such an interesting question. Of course, it's the question everybody has, but why would you need to see the human in a different format to see if they are producing the work that they need to do? Now, I will tell you, actually, there is a reason why. Is that the people who start off at kind of, who have I forget there's like a psychological term, and I'm a little worried I'm going to abuse it here, but it is something like a low propensity for trust. People who start out that way, they themselves don't feel trusted unless other people see them. Like, they need to be seen at work to feel like they're being trusted. So trust is like a two-way thing. It's not just I trust you. You have to feel trusted. And people who have this low propensity not only don't trust other people if they can't see them, they don't feel trusted. So in a way, you're saying like, go do the work. I don't care when you do it. Like, let's make sure we just have a couple touch points so we know when we need to talk to each other and you know what you're turning in. That's cool with somebody else who who will feel trusted in that environment. But for a person who needs to be seen, that might not work particularly well, even if they could do the work. Even if technically they had the skills, it might not build the relationship that they need. So there's some kind of subtlety to this that's beyond just the like, are they producing the work? Although certainly, are they producing the work seems a lot more important than are they at their desk during non-core hours.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is like the last, 10 years has been this burst of actual formal research on trust, perceptions of trustworthiness, and trust behaviors. This idea that there's some internal scoreboard that's keeping track of, I tell this to my kids, right? If you do a thing and then you do a thing and you do a thing, and like every time I ask you to do a thing, you do the thing, I'm like not really keeping score, but I'm like, oh, I can rely on you. And then if you completely drop the ball, then you're going to have to build that trust back up. That's a real thing, the internal thermometer.
Yeah, that's right. So that reliability is one of the main aspects of trust, sort of capability, reliability. Do other people believe you're capable? Do they believe you're reliable? And do they believe you're interested in the common good? You can demonstrate all of those things and have them demonstrated to you very effectively in a remote situation. And you'll note none of those things requires seeing each other in person. But for some people, there is this other factor of kind of being physically seen doing the things that contribute to the common good, to reliability, and to
Yeah.
capability.
Yeah. I have caught
I
myself in my own internal biases preferring people who have their cameras on. And I know that that's wrong because
That's interesting.
I think I'm more of an extrovert and I want to see people and I like seeing your face because there's so much information. Like, I don't want to be on a conference call. I want to see people. So I have spent my last 15 years trying to get higher resolution cameras and better lighting. And so I can pretend that we're really in the same room while other people are like, in bed with their bonnet on a call. And that's okay. And I need to be okay with that being okay, even though it changes my perception.
I would say two things about that. I do think that it's important to see each other sometimes because, as you say, the information you get visually is much richer than the information you can get only auditorially.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I do think it's actually there is value seeing people's faces, especially in certain kinds of conversations. But the other thing that we get out of seeing each other on video, especially when you're working from home, is the context in which the person's working. So I can see your setup and you've got like a video console game back there, it looks like, which I'm curious about. And some other kind of interesting things on the walls that tell me a little bit about you and give me a little context for who you are. And when we're in person in an office, you lose that context about the person's life, their family, their pets, things that might show up in video, the books that might be behind them that tell you something about them. And I actually find that like people seem contextless to me in an office. Like you lack some intimacy that you gain when you can see those things in the background. Now we can curate our backgrounds. That's part of how we present ourselves in the way that what we're wearing is how we present ourselves. But I think there's value in sometimes having the cameras on to be able to just share some context with each other.
I think that is really 100% true. I think two things can be true at the same time, though, which is during the pandemic, when we all were pushed into our homes, a lot of people felt like, I came here to work. I came here to specifically distance myself from my home. I did not invite you, my coworker, Sarah, into my house to see my dog, and they may say, I'm in my bedroom. I don't have an extra room. I don't have a space. I don't need you to see my bed in the background. Or
Yeah.
I like not having to do my hair today. So, or put my face on. So why should I have to do that? So I kind of respect both. Like, I want the extra context. I find backgrounds fascinating because it does tell you
Right.
about the people's space, but it may tell you that the person doesn't have any art on the wall, and that's okay. And they don't want to
Yeah.
put their face on, and that's okay. So it's a real balancing act.
I agree. That's totally true. And of course, like there's a reason that background blur has become a standard feature in real-time video, and that's
Mm-hmm.
completely legitimate, and nobody should ever be feel like coerced into having to show their background or be on video at all. Like it's not doesn't work for everybody all of the time. But the point that I was making is there can be benefits to having cameras on even in work from home situations, and sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
especially if people are comfortable with it, less formal where your kids are showing up randomly and
See, I
your
love
pets
that.
are
I
like
think that's great.
wandering. Right. Exactly. And in it not as long as the people who are on camera are comfortable with that and are made to be comfortable with that, it helps humanize and build trust among us. Again, you have more context for what are your coworkers, what is their work life like, and what are the other people that they are accountable to besides each other.
Yeah.
Um, but I agree with you completely. Of course, not everybody needs to be camera on at home all the time. That's
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
that would be counterproductive.
But you are bringing it back to building trust, trustworthiness. And it's not that I should feel pressure to turn video on to be trusted. It's that you have made a space for me to be able to turn my video on, and I'm not going to get judged. One of my vice presidents, Amanda Silver, one time in the early time of the pandemic when we all were back home, her daughter came in, and we're in the middle of a big all hands. And I'm like, oh, and this is like before the whole BBC, little kid comes in and interrupts the live video thing. And I'm like, what's going to happen? Like, this is going to be dramatic. And she just put her daughter on her knee and continued to lead a meeting of hundreds of people. And in doing that, though, set the tone for the rest of us that it's okay to be a human at work. And
Yeah,
that's just been
totally.
awesome. Those kind of behaviors, or taking a meeting on a walk. And that's okay sometimes, right? It all depends on context. When leadership does that, then it quietly tells everyone else it's okay.
Yeah. That's exactly right. And I think especially there's certainly a difference in how women in particular are perceived when they bring their kids into, or their kids come into the frame. And I think I've heard from lots of mothers, especially, that can be a little bit fraught for them because they're worried about being judged. And so the more leaders can make that okay and have it be normal and have it be part of how they behave, I think the easier it is for known things to happen for everybody else, or known and have that be a positive, like a feature, not a bug.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. In this case, it was really meaningful, not just because she is a woman, because she's our vice president. And
Right.
that set the tone, and anyone should be able to do that, regardless of gender. So I think it was great that she did that. And then, by the way, just as we end here, speaking of video at length, Daily at daily.co, it's actually a platform as a service. It's a PaaS service for WebRTC, so you can integrate video into any application with Daily, which is the company that you're leading.
Yeah, we spend a lot of time on video calls.
Yeah, I was going to say, you probably are going to be more biased towards video calls because your whole platform is probably running on your platform, which is cool. All right. Well, thanks so much for hanging out with me today.
Scott, thank you so much. This has been a lot of fun.
We've been chatting with Sarah Milstein. She's the VP of Engineering at Daily. And this has been another episode of Hansel Minutes. And we'll see you again next week.